This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. You can now watch Uprising on Free Speech TV, which airs on Dish Network Channel 9415, DirecTV Channel 348, and on hundreds of part-time cable affiliates and on Roku. Earlier this month, President Obama formally sought congressional approval for the war against ISIS that he launched 6 months earlier. The move gives Congress the opportunity to debate the war, but it appears as though many members of Congress feel the war authorization is too broad. Still others, like Senator John McCain, think it's too narrow. Obama had initially cited the 2001 military authorization obtained by President Bush as justifying his actions in northern Iraq and Syria. If Congress does not approve his submitted request, he simply has the option to fall back on the 2001 authorization. But my guest, Andrew Bacevich, sees Obama's request for permission for war as, quote, an extraordinary opportunity. He draws a historical comparison to President Richard Nixon's expansion of the Vietnam War to Cambodia in 1970. Andrew Bacevich is a professor of international relations and history at Boston University. He's a former career Army officer, author of a number of books, including Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War. Welcome to Uprising, Professor Bacevich. How is the 1970 request for war by Nixon a good comparison to today?
Well, there was no request back in 1970. Just to recall the history, in the spring of 1970, Richard Nixon, without getting anybody's advance permission, invaded Cambodia, thereby expanding the Vietnam War. And the point of the analogy is to say that in effect is what President Obama has done with regard to ISIS. There's this ongoing war, the war we used to call a war against terrorism. He has now expanded it, and then having expanded it, as you said in your initial remarks, now he's asking for permission. My argument is simply that if we imagine back in 1970 that after Nixon invaded Cambodia, he had gone to the Congress and said to the Congress, please authorize me to do what I have already done. We don't know how Congress would have reacted, but my speculation is that they would not have simply debated whether or not to give permission to invade Cambodia. I believe that they would actually have used that occasion to initiate a far more far-ranging debate about the Vietnam War and more broadly about U.S. policy in the Cold War. And it seems to me that's the opportunity that the Congress has right now that they ought to capitalize on. Not to talk about whether or not to go fight ISIS, but to use this occasion to take stock of this decades-long military enterprise that we have been engaged in the greater Middle East.
So in asking for Congress's permission, President Obama has provided an opportunity that the 1970 Congress didn't have, but ought to have had. Some have also compared ISIS to the Khmer Rouge, a communist group in Cambodia, notorious for its killings and torture. And just as that rebel group offered up this sort of perfect evil bogeyman for the U.S. to expand its war, do you see ISIS offering the same thing today and sort of offering the same trap today that the U.S. is falling in?
Oh, I think so. And I mean, we need to be very careful here. ISIS is an evil and terrible organization. There's no way in which one could offer any defense of the actions that they have undertaken. That said, we should separate that from the larger question of what exactly is the United States trying to accomplish in its military engagement in the Islamic world? To what degree have our efforts thus far produced success? What is the likelihood of simply trying harder is going to produce success in the future? Indeed, I would argue that it may well be imperative for us to destroy ISIS, and yet even if we do so, even if tomorrow we could declare victory over ISIS, by no means would that somehow suggest that our larger military efforts in the region are on track for success, because they're not.